It's Oren Prunken, and today I want to talk to you about when a logo or any other brand asset really matters for you. I've literally just driven past a McDonald's and the Golden Arches, and that gave me some inspiration to talk to you about logos and other brand assets. But first I need to give you an example. When a child is really young and they've never experienced something like, for example, the smell of a coffee aroma, what happens is they come across that sense. We all have 5 senses. It comes into their consciousness, and they have an experience with that. It's either good or it's bad or it's neutral. And then the second time they come across that same sense, the coffee smell aroma, that original experience has been formed as a memory from the very first time, and it's called back, the good, the bad, or the neutral. And the second time they smell that same memory comes back, and they have it again and again and again, all the way through their life. Now, as a side point, first impressions matter and first impressions last, and it's really hard to change first impressions. So when someone comes across your brand for the very first time, it's really important that they have a great first experience with that. And that leads me into the coffee and that example, the coffee aroma in that example, for what you can do with your brand. The very same thing happens. The same process happens with a human when they first come across your brand. First time they see it, they are neutral to your brand. They've never come across it, right? How could they have an opinion about it? Then that very first interaction through their 5 senses is either good, bad, or neutral. They have an emotional experience based upon what they experienced through their senses. And like a child, with the very first time they smell the coffee aroma, the next time they come across your brand prospect, that original memory from the very first experience is triggered, and it comes back as good or bad or neutral. And you can see this happen in your own life. There are some brands that you have phenomenal experiences with, and every time you see a logo or something like a brand smell, like a cologne or a taste, something like a Cadbury chocolate, for example, you have great experiences with it. And vice versa, there's some brands that you see their logo and you want to do nothing but yell at them, right? So the same experience happens with your prospect as it does with a child, with any other. Same thing happens with your brand as does with a child with any smells. Now, why is this important in terms of your logo or any other brand assets? Now, I will try to explain kind of this in simple terms. What your brand assets, like a smell or a sound, like Intel, their chip that has a little jingle, or things like a logo. What that does is it consolidates that vast experience, all of the senses and the emotions around it, and it condenses or distills that down into a single brand asset, a logo, a sound, a smell, a color, for example. So instead of trying to recreate that experience after the fact, what you can do is bring that brand asset back and trigger that same memory or emotion that happened the first time. For example, when a child first smelt that coffee, all you need to do is put a pot of coffee on again, and you will elicit that same experience and those same emotions that child experienced the very first time. Same with your brand. You can just pop a logo up the second time, and that just seeing that logo condenses that very first experience. As long as they saw a logo in that very first experience, also it needs to have this connection between both the very first experience and the second experience, and that's where a brand asset comes. It takes the original experience, consolidates it the first time, and then you can bring it back a second time by bringing up that anchor. Now, how does this work practically for you and your brand? Well, first off, as I said, you want to have really great experiences for customers and prospects the first time they interact with you. You want to be able to then anchor it to some sort of memory through a brand asset, a logo or a smell, so that the next time you see them or they come across your brand, you can bring that experience back by using that same anchor that they saw the very first time. So there's 2 things: create a great experience, anchor that experience with a logo, and then be able to bring that back with a logo the second time round. Now, the biggest thing that people do beyond missing those two things or only having one, not the other, is they obsess around the quote-unquote design of all of these assets. You know, the graphic design of a logo or the design of a jingle or a taste of something. None of that matters unless you have a brand that is driven purely by design. You know, for example, a graphic designer or a sound engineer or a architect. None of that matters. For those small cohort of brands, you need to be congruent with what you are offering, and in those instances you need to have quote unquote great design. But for everyone else, it does not matter. You think about the McDonald's logo that I was talking about before, it is just a simple yellow M. The experience is what matters, not the logo. The logo is the trigger for the original anchor. Now, what I was going to say next was that logos and other brand assets are really subjective. What you could like and think is quote unquote great design is not necessarily what a prospect or consumer considers to be great. Vice versa, what a prospect or customer thinks is, you know, phenomenal, you may just absolutely despise. It is all subjective. The only thing that matters is the things I've just said before. The design, quote unquote, subjective design doesn't matter, unless of course you are in the industry that has to sell that as your core business. If you think about it another way, personal brands do not have brand assets like logos, for example, unless you're the artist formerly known as Prince. It's probably the only one I can think of off the top of my head. So I want you to go about thinking how this could relate to you. Even if you're going through a rebrand, it's not just for startups, it's for everyone, including established brands, can benefit from this. Think about what experience you're giving the first time, how you're anchoring that, and then how you're then going about triggering that memory. And don't obsess about quote unquote design. Just have an asset that links both of those two things for them and for you. And they, you know, your brand's going to have a great experience from this, as are your prospects and customers. So like always, I want you to try this out, regardless if you're a startup or established brand, and let me know how you go. Send me your comments and your questions, because I love hearing from everyone. And until we talk next time, I hope this was super useful. Hope you have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening, and if you like what was on here and want more, please go to orenprunken.com.